Hello everybody and welcome back to a new Friday evening coding session, and we'll continue to work on our .NET 6 Minimal API, and I guess this will be the really last session in this series because we just have a few more endpoints to implement. And I guess we've gone through a lot of things here. We've seen things that are not working that well in the Minimal API so far. And this week I also got in a few discussions both on Twitter but also on GitHub with some folks from .NET 6, and there's also already documentation published on docs.microsoft.com regarding the Minimal API. And it seems that unfortunately there are a lot of things that will not be fully supported in the Minimal API, and a few of them are, for instance, action filters or filters in general. So if you used iAsync authorization filters or iAsync action filters or iAsync resource filters or any type of other filters, this is not working. But also API versioning is not working in .NET 6 Minimal API. And there is one other thing that is quite not okay, and this is the fact that you can't actually run this in a hybrid mode. And let me explain what I mean by that. Because usually when you have ASP.NET Core applications, you can, for instance, then in your application use also controllers, but also use Razor pages. And you could even use Blazor server, but also use Razor pages and controllers and similar to that. So you can have actually a lot of different type of combinations of technologies that are there in ASP.NET Core to actually get your job done for the specific task that you actually want to accomplish. However, unfortunately, this is not possible with the Minimal API. So in the Minimal API, if you choose to go for the Minimal API, then well, that's it. You have to stick to the Minimal API. And coming to that, we also had our struggles, for instance, with Swagger. No matter how we did describe our endpoints, we still didn't get it to work properly as we would have to, or as how we wished to. And yeah, of course, that's probably with a lot more troubles and headaches. Probably you could get it working. Theoretically, everything should be supported in Swagger, but still, it's an overhead. So all these put together, I guess that, well, Minimal API is for sure something very interesting. It's worth getting in touch with, but probably starting with .NET 7, it will be a more solid technology. So yeah, that's kind of my take for now on the Minimal API after working with it for a while. And here there's this question from Twitch. By the way, I'm streaming both on Twitch and on YouTube. So Web API for Total Noobs, you will publish next week, and I have a very good news for you. I will start the series on Monday. So this coming Monday, in 3 days from now, and I will publish the live streaming event on YouTube. I will publish, I guess, this evening probably, or at latest tomorrow. So if you're following on Twitch and there on Twitch, maybe, yeah, I guess I can also publish a schedule there. But if you want to stay in touch, maybe you just should bookmark also the event on YouTube when I create it, so that you know when we start. And probably it will be around the exact same hour as we do today. It's 9 p.m. in Romania, which is a perfect time for me to write some code or to have a short chat and discussions regarding .NET technologies. Okay, so yeah, that would be it. On Monday we start with the ASP.NET Core for Total Noobs, and I hope that would be something interesting. That won't be a live coding only session. That would be much more like a training. So there will be also some discussions, some few slides, but of course we will also do a lot of hands-on coding because, well, that's how I usually design my trainings, with a lot of hands-on things to do. So yeah, let's get started here with this one. Basically what I want to do, I just want to finish up and implement all the endpoints that we still need here. So the plan for today is to actually get here for authors. For now, we have just a get and the post for the authors, but we want to implement the full. We want to implement it the full CRUD functionalities. So we would have to add here a get by ID, an update, and a delete. Probably with the delete will be some issues because we didn't pay attention at all at how the relationships were actually created in a database by Entity Framework Core. But I really won't dive into that. If there are problems, well, then that's basically it. But then we have to go to blogs, and here to blogs, you will also have to we have for now this get API blog, so a list of blogs. We have the post for that, so to create a blog, and we can get a blog by ID. We just want to also add the possibility to update the blog's basic information, maybe to update the author of the blog. I don't know, that would be also something. And then we have this concept of contributors, so that we could add contributors to a certain blog. And here we might need to work with nested resources. I guess that might be even interesting. But let's get started, I would say, with something that's more easy, just to get in a certain rhythm. And that would be, I guess, working on the authors themselves, or on the authors endpoint. So for the authors endpoint, we have this module here where we placed everything in one single folder because we said it could be, or we said that it won't be a feature that would be too big. But for the blogs, we actually split that in different type of things. So here for authors, we have here, let's see, where do we have the module? It should be here somewhere. Here's the author module. So yeah, here we have this API authors, and let's start by adding the endpoint, and then we'll add everything that we still discovered that we need to actually implement that endpoint. So let's add an endpoint for getting an author by ID. Endpoints.map_get. So that would be under API/authors/ID. And the way that we can actually pass routing parameters is actually very, very similar to what we see in controllers. So we just have here a placeholder, like this ID that is in curly braces. And then of course that we can actually inject that. So it would be async. We can inject the ID here into ID. So it will be injected just like it would happen in a controller. And here we would have to actually implement a method for that. So let's go where we have the methods, and we have these private methods here. So it would be private async task of iResult. It would be async because we're using mediator, and yeah, we will run async comments and queries because of course we rely also on the database. So as said, the endpoint in a minimal API always return an iResult, and this would be get author by ID. It would take in an int ID. And let's also wire this up with the endpoint that we create. Get author by ID, and we pass in the int, and we also have to await that. Cool, so we have this, and then the things that we need for Swagger, more or less. So the name of this endpoint would be get author by ID. Then of course we need a dot here. Okay, and then the display name is what Swagger actually uses in this case to create those sections in the documentation. So yeah, my cat is running crazy right now. I guess she just wants out of this room. So the display name would be also authors. Tags we actually don't need. What this will return is actually Here returns an author get DTO, so we return just a single one. So produces dot so it will produce an author get DTO. And probably, why doesn't it? Of course, I have a typo here. Now it's okay. And let's assume probably we'll get some server errors at a certain point. Let's just say it could also produce an 500 error. Okay, so we are fine with that. SK Web, sorry, but I really don't understand what you have written in the chat. So if you could use English, that would be great. Good. So we have described the endpoint that we want. Now we already have the DTO for that, and for the DTO we have this author get DTO, and this author get DTO, it has an ID, a name, a bio, and a date of birth. So this is actually what this author has. So let's then implement the mediator stuff. So what we need for that? We need a query, and we need a handler for that. So let's add that. And you know what? Let me just I guess we still have a lot of files here. So let's add folders. Queries. And for now let's get all authors query. I guess that would be want to move there. Yes, I just want to move it. Then let's go here. Oh, sorry, not a class. I don't want a class. I just want a new folder. I want to rearrange this also with folders because we start to have too many files here. So we will have then commons here. And I guess for this one, we don't have any command. Let's add a new folder that would be for DTOs. And here we have an author DTO and an author get DTO. So let's move them to the DTOs folder. Okay, let's also rename this because we have, of course, once again created a typo. Good. So we have moved also this one. Let's add handlers folder. And what handlers do we actually have here? We have a command. We have this create author command. So let's move this to the command folder. SKWeb, I already told just as we started the stream that unfortunately API versioning in Minimal API is not supported. So I already had this discussion because it seems that there are some very important things from my point of view that are not supported or not that easy to work with. And support for versioning is one of them. That's even documented in the Microsoft documentation that actually came out this week. So unfortunately that would not be possible. Also, you can't use filters and you can't use the Minimal API, let's say in a hybrid way where you would have some endpoints using Minimal API but others using controllers. So you won't be able to have that, unfortunately. So that's why my general conclusion about the Minimal API is that it's actually a great step forward, but I would not use it for production applications. In .NET 7, probably it will become more robust and more solid, and probably starting with .NET 7, it would be something to take into consideration. But for now, as said, I wouldn't do that for production applications. Or maybe if I just have to create some very small APIs that are used just internally by one or two applications or something like that, that would be possible probably. But for more complex things, I wouldn't do that. Also, model binding is not supported by default, so you cannot use that model state is valid. And it's there are several things that are not 100% there. Also, using Swagger is not that straightforward. Theoretically, everything is supported, but practically we have struggled a lot with that. So yeah, that's also something that that we have to take into consideration. So overall, I guess that's a good step forward, but we still have to wait for the next .NET to see some more solid improvements. Good. Then let's create an folder here for the handlers. Because for those of we already have that folder. For those of you who might be new to this stream, we actually use the CQRS and we use Mediator. So we have this concept of query command, and we have a handler that's responsible to handle that. So let's move these handlers here. Good. And then let's create a new folder. We'll call that profiles for the AutoMapper profiles. And I guess we have only one, but if we have started to arrange this with folders, let's just... And I won't go here and edit the namespaces for each class. I'll use the same namespace. I'll use the same namespace, but we have it better organized with folders right now. Good. So we have everything that we need reorganized, and yeah, that's a good step forward, I would say. Okay, let's then what would be the next one? So we wanted to implement a query and a handler for get author by ID. That was, I guess, the last one, and the author module we leave here. So yeah, we need for the get author by ID. Okay, let's go then here in the queries folder, add a new class, get author by ID, and as we work with Mediator, we have to implement iRequest, and we'll return author get DTO. This is what we will return. First, we would need to add some musings. Okay, so that would be good. Now, in this get author by ID query, there is actually only one property that we need, and this is the ID of the author, public int author ID. So that would be it for the query. So now let's implement a handler for that query. Get author by ID handler, and as Mediator says, we need here to implement iQuest handler, and here we have to specify first the query or the command, and then we have to specify the return type. So the query is get author by ID. First, we would also have to implement some musings here, queries, and it would return an author get DTO. Okay, sorry, the angle bracket should be here at the end, of course. So that's also another typo, but we'll fix that. Okay, we also added this one. We implement the interface. And here in the handler is actually where we also inject everything that that we actually need. So we'll have here a constructor, and what we'll need here is actually we'll need the DB context private read only full DB context. First, we would need to add the using for that. Good, and we'll also need probably private read only. We need the IMapper. Okay, and then we can just of course we need to inject them also. Thoughtful DB context and mapper, and then we can just assign it to our field like we usually do, and then the mapper we can use tab, and that's it. So that's what we actually need right now. this is already a task, so that's okay. In the get author by ID, we'll have the information. So I guess that would actually be very straightforward. Var author equals context dot authors dot first or default async first, and we need also to await this. And here we can specify the criteria. So we want an author for which the ID equals to the author ID that we have in the query. So that should do it. Okay, what is the problem here? What is the problem here? Author is not null here. Okay, but no problem. Can be used with an async. Oh, of course, sorry, we haven't. It returns a task, but we haven't marked it as async. Sorry for that. So now that we have the author, like of course the author is our domain model, so it's what we have here. But for that we have actually a DTO, so we want to map to the DTO. We already have a profile for the mapping, so we can just use it and just say here return mapper map, and we want to map to an author get DTO, and we want to pass in the author, which is our domain model, and that should be it for our handler. So now we can go back to our module and implement this method and say var result equals await mediator dot send, and we just create here a new get by ID query, or get author by ID. It's called get author by ID. Of course, we need to add the using for that. And then we can use a collection initializer and set here the author ID equals, it's the ID that we actually get back from our endpoint. And then we can here say return results dot okay. Okay, and here we can then just specify the result that we want to return. Actually, we can get a little bit more fancy here. So if the author is null, because it could be null, for instance, in that case, you can simply have an if here. If result is null, but not results, I just want my result. Don't care about the results right now. So if result is null, then we return results dot not found. Yeah, not found. It's okay. And else we just return the okay. And in this case, let's also go to the endpoint and say that it could also produce a 404. Produces 404. That will be it. That works right now. So yeah, I guess that that should be it for now. So let's try to run our application and check out if we can. Okay, we have build errors, so let's look into that. Okay. Okay. This is because business but it used like a type. I guess where do we have this author? Did the okay, we want the author DTO to the author, so using thoughtful dot, but it is thoughtful dot domain dot model. So let me look into the files because I know where the problem is. The problem is the way that we have named our mappings here. So let's get here to the where do we have what what did we create here? So we did get author by ID, and this is in author queries. That's okay. Then get all authors. Author feature dot. I guess I have to rename the namespaces after all. And then the handlers. So that's the handler that I created right now. That would be author dot handlers. Okay, that one should be okay right now. The feature author feature. Okay, author get detail. To get all this should be fixed right now. Create author command. That's exactly the same problem, but it should take an let me fully qualify this. .domain .model .author. So yeah, now that I have fully qualified that, the problem is gone. Here, get all authors query. Get this where is this get all authors query? Where do we have it? It's in author feature queries, but let's name it here. We can then rename it just to author, and then the author get DTO API features author feature. Okay, so that one should be fixed. Still have some error. Okay, then it's not here, but it's here, the queries. So now it is okay. So that one is okay. That one is the author right now. Let's also fully qualify it. The problem is that we had a very bad naming for our feature folder, and therefore it conflicted with what we already had as namespaces. So we had to rename a few things here, and when we move things around, well, things of course exploded. But we are here to fix everything. So here we have once again a create map. Let's fully qualify this. But of course we have also to still, it's not okay. Let's just use this one from here. I'm mistyping. That would be in our domain, and it should be in the models. Okay, so we're okay with that, and now we don't have any errors. Good. Now let's run the API again, and let's make sure that everything still works with the author. Yeah, we have it on the other monitor, but I will bring it here, no problems. So we have here now to get, so get authors. Let's try it out. And let's see. Okay, we got some authors. We have 1, 2, and 1002 as the IDs. Okay, that's cool. Let's try to create a new author here. How should we call this author? Let's call it David Poller. Nice bio, and we leave the date of today, and let's execute. And it was created, so we have also an ID for that. So this endpoint also works. And then the endpoint that we have implemented right now, which is the get author by ID. So let's try it out, and let's try with the ID 1. And and we got our result back, which is okay. And if we look at the description, we see that we can get a 404 not found, or that we can get a server error. That's actually cool. Let's even try this out. Like for instance, with ID 10, we shouldn't have an author here, so we get a 404. So this means that that our if is working right there in the endpoint. So yeah, cool. We have here the option to actually add the author. Now let's look at the author just a bit. And here, if we want to update the author, what we want to update is the first name, is the last name, its date of birth, and bio. So we can still use the author get DTO, for instance, as the body for, or no, the date of birth. Yeah, we could update it. Let's look at our DTOs. What's the author DTO? It's actually this. It has a first name, a last name, a bio, and a date of birth, which is okay. And the author get DTO, ID, name, bio, date of birth. It actually has the exact same things. So that is not a good design. I would have probably to change this. So the idea of having different DTOs for posts and gets is that usually the difference is the ID. Here we don't need the ID actually, because if the ID is handled by the database, we shouldn't be able to post the ID or to put the ID. So we'll get here, so we'll use the author DTO for an update and assume that the consumers would be able to provide new values to whichever field they would like there. So let's go on and implement this endpoint by using this record, and it's in author feature. Cool. Let's start with the endpoint that we get, or that we want, and yeah, we'll just add it here. Endpoints.map put in this case, because this is what we want to map right now, and it would be on API /author / but I guess right now that's not something it's /authors. It should be. We should be consistent. So /authors /authors /authors, and once again authors. Okay, and of course we will also need the AD here. Good. So, and then here we will get an author DTO, author to update. And we'll also have this as an async. Sorry, not here, but here. And here we'll have a method await update the author. And here we'll actually need an int ID and the body. And let's also go on a new line here, and we will have here update authors. We'll have the int ID, and we'll have the author DTO dot and we'll sorry, here we just pass in the params ID and author to update. That would be okay. So let's implement this method right now. We can make that private, as we already did with all the others. Async task, it would return an I result. And the name is what we have provided right there. And what we will need is an int ID and an author author DTO. And when we create the command, let's just specify a property for first name, last name, bio, and date time in the command. So let's go to the commands folder and create add, and we'll add a new one. update author, public class, that is an I request. Should this return something? Yes, that would be a good question, if this should return something or not. Okay, my Visual Studio is going a little bit crazy. My cursor still points. That's not nice. Okay, so it would be an I request. We'll just return no content for the update if it is successful. So yeah, let's in this case, what we will need here in this command, we would need a set public string first name get, and let's be smart, let's use init only properties, because we don't want actually this to be changed once we create them. Public, okay, we have the last name, we have then a public string bio get init, and then public date time, date of birth, I guess. I assume we should be able to update this, because maybe we have, when we created the author, we have provided a wrong date, so we want to update that at a certain point. So yeah, I don't want to use this as a datetime now. So that is my command. Now let's create a handler for that. Add new class. Where is it? But we would also need the author ID, know exactly which author to look for. So author dot public string author ID get and init. Get good. Now, the ID, of course, will map from the URL, and all the other information will map from the body that we receive. So that's pretty straightforward. So let's go here and create the handler for that. So add new class. It would be here on update author handler, public update author handler. It should implement I request handler, and here it should be an I request handler of update author, which is the command that we want to use. Good. So in this case we don't want to return anything, so that's why we specify here only one in and no out for this interface. So we just say that we get this command, we will do some processing, but we won't return anything. So that's cool. And here the idea is that the mediator just returns a task of unit to just not return void. So unit, if we look into this in mediator, it's actually, well, it's something that represents kind of like a unit of work, but you don't just actually return anything. You just can compare two units to see if they are, well, or if they refer to the same thing. But that's quite it. That's like a placeholder type, I would say, for mediator when you don't actually want to return something. So it just returns task of unit. Good. So here once again, but you know what? Let's don't get all, or get, where is it? Not in the handler. Get author by ID. Let's just reuse that. Let's just reuse that in the update. So let's have a constructor for that, and let's also add the fields. Of course, we would need to add the usings for that. We would need a data access layer, and let's also inject those. DB context and the IMapper and Let's do this. That should be fine. Good. So right now we can get the necessary information that we actually want. So what we'll get here is actually we can first of all var author, and then what we will say here is author equals await context dot authors first or default async, just like we did previously with the get by ID. So we want an author for which the ID equals to the request dot author ID. Cool. Now we have that, and let's go and use. Okay, what is the problem here? So the ID should be request author ID. What I guess here. The author operator cannot be applied of operands of type int and string. Okay, which one is a string? This one is a string. Oh, that's not what we wanted. So let's go to the update author command. Of course, no, it's int. Int, not string. Why didn't you say anything? Good. So let's go back to the handler. So now we should be good with that one. So once we get the author, let's do this like we have started for the blog to create something which we call a rich domain model. So when it comes to update an author, we just pass in some information, but the author instance or class should be responsible for actually handling the updates, because maybe we want to do validations and things like that. So let's go in our domain model to the author class, and instead of relying on this very anemic domain model, let's try to model it a little bit more towards a rich domain model. And the first thing to do here is what we could do here. We have a public. It would actually return void. We don't want to return anything. And we have update author. Now this is an instance method, not a static method, so we don't really care about the ID. And what we care about though is we want a string for the first name, we want a string for the last name, we want a string for bio, and we want string bio, and we want a date time for date of birth. Of course, here is where you would do validations on all these strings and make sure that everything is correct, and you might have business rules on what the name should look like, how long it should be, whatever. In this case, we will just skip that because we want to concentrate on our API, not on our domain right now. So what we will do here is we will simply say that the first name equals first name. We would also say here that last name equals last name. We would also say here that bio equals bio. And we'll also say here that date of birth equals date of birth. So right now, as you see, the whole concept is that in the handler, we are not responsible to know exactly how we should update an author. The author class should be responsible for that. So that's why we have deferred this responsibility to the class itself. So if we go back to the handler in this case, once we have this author, what we can say, for instance, if let's say not equals author is null. So if the author is not null, then what we want to do here is author, and then we have this update author method, and here we can pass in request dot first name, request dot last name, request dot bio, and request dot date of birth. So now that we have updated the author, so we really don't care. We just have the author. We used the method which the author provides for updating an author. We don't really care if something happened there, if the properties were updated or not, whatever. But we know that the domain class itself would do something. So after we know that the domain class would do something, we just need to persist this change to the database. We would have here context or await context.save changes async, and that should be it. We don't actually need to return anything here. Okay, what is we can just return the unit. Okay, okay. However, we don't really care about this unit, but yeah, we just need to use that. And we didn't use AutoMapper here, so we can just remove the dependency on AutoMapper. That's the cool thing of working with handlers, because here in each handler is very, I would say, atomic in a certain way, because it can perform only one single action. And therefore, you can just inject only the things that you need in that handler. So you would not end up like we usually have in controllers, for instance, when we have a lot of injected services that are used in one method, and if we have in a controller in the controller 12 different methods or actions, then probably for some of them we need some services, for others we need other services, so we end up having a lot of services injected into our controllers. And working with handlers, that's quite nice because we can just avoid that. So we'll always have a very clean and neat handler, I would say. And if the handler gets too big, like this handle method, and that means that it's time maybe to think about refactoring, because usually what you would have to do in that case, it means that you have too much logic here, and you should try to push that logic towards the domain model itself, so towards the author class. And if that logic is something that I would say goes beyond the author class itself, that might also involve updating other aggregates and similar stuff, then in that case we might use some domain services. However, domain services, and when I say here in this context about domain services, I think mostly about how the domain services are defined in domain-driven design, are actually services that are responsible to perform certain actions between different aggregates, but they don't actually work with the database. So everything is domain logic, so it has nothing to do with the database. And once we have, surely of course, that the domain service would produce a certain result, and then here in our handlers we can use that result and then take the actions that we need to persist those results in the database, or take the appropriate actions that we would actually need to take based on the result that the domain service gives us. So you should always try or have the aim to have this handler class as small as possible, and especially this handle method. It should be really as small as possible. Good. So now we have sorted this out. So we have the command, we have the handler. So let's go back to our module here, and let's create here var command equals new update author command. I guess it's without command, it's update author. That's how we called the class. Okay, that's what we want to do. And here we will also use an object initializer, define the data in this command. So we have first the author ID, which would be equal to the ID that we have here. We have first name, which would be equal to author to update dot first name. Then we'll have last name, which would be equal to author to update dot last name, of course. Then we have a bio, which would be equal to author to update dot bio. And last but not least, we would have a date of birth equals author to update dot date of birth. So that should be, so now we have the command. Now the only thing that we would need to do is here have an await mediator.send. So we just send this command that we have just created, and then mediator will find the necessary handler, will execute that, and we don't really care what happens afterwards. So we can just return results, no content. So that's what we actually want to return. Okay, let's go back here to our module. So we see that it okay, we have that. Let's also describe our endpoint, of course. So with name, the name would be, and the name should be unique. That's important. Update author. Display name is not necessary to be unique. With display name, and the display name would be still authored because we want to have all these endpoints grouped in Swagger under the same section. What do we produce here? Produces, okay, and here let's say, can we just do results.no content? Results. No, it actually doesn't care about this. Okay. But you know what? Maybe we can just say here, no content. No, can we say results.no content? No, it doesn't work. Good. So in this case, we would have to go with the status code. So let's just look here just a little bit. No content, which is then status for 204. So let's just add this directly here. But if we get a server error, well, we might produce also a server error. So let's also have this 500 here. And I guess that's everything that we need right now for this endpoint. So there's nothing else that we actually need here. So let's test this out, of course. Hopefully everything works. Okay. On the other monitor, I'll bring it right here. So we have this put. Okay. Let's do that actually. So let's try it out. So the ID, let's change the author with ID 1, and yeah, let's use here my name. Here, nice bio. And the daytime we leave exactly like it is, like the daytime now. I don't really care about that. I just want to see that the endpoint works. Okay, so we got here a 204, no content, which is cool. Now let's test this out with the get endpoint. And yeah, we have updated the author with ID 1. So we have execute, and we see that we have the updates right now. Even the date is the new date from today. Cool. So this works. So I guess there's only one other endpoint that we need to implement here with the authors, which is the delete one. So let's get on with that one. Endpoints dot delete, map delete, sorry. Good. So in this case, we would have here the route here should be API slash authors slash ID once again, but in this case, of course, with delete. And what we need here is async. In this case, we don't need anything injected here because the ID we need the ID. So let's have it int ID, and we'll have here a method delete author, which takes in the ID, and we'll create this method just in a few steps. Then let's also with name here, the name would be delete author. Display name would be also authors because we want to have them in the same section, of course. And then also the produces, we will produce here also a 204, and possibly we'll get a server error. So produces, let's have a 500. Okay, so that will be it. Now let's implement the method or start to implement the method. And here, I guess it would be a good place. Private async task I result. And here the name would be delete author, and we'll need the ID for that. Int ID. Now for the delete, this is also a command because we want to execute something on the server. It's not that we just want to get some data. So this is not a query, of course. So let's go and start working on that. So in the commands folder, let's add a new class here. The class would be then delete author, which this would be the command. So it has then I request, but we actually won't return anything. So it's just I request. The only thing that we need here as a property is public int ID. Let's call this author ID. And let's use also an init only property. This is everything that we need for the command. Let's now create the handler for that. So here we have handlers, add class delete author handler, and this needs to implement I request handler, and we just have to provide the first generic parameter, which is the delete author. It should be here. Okay. So implement interface. We should mark this as async because we will do some async stuff there. And from this update, let's take in this DB context field because we will need it here. Let's first create the constructor for that. And then let's add this DB context. This is our DB context class. And a good thing about this type of architecture with CQRS and handlers is that you actually don't need repositories. So you really don't need repositories in this case. And then here I would have also the thoughtful DB context, and I'll assign it here. Cool. So we have a DB context. Now, what should we do here? We should then try to get the author var author equals wait context dot authors dot where is it authors first or default async. And then we want an author for which the ID equals the ID that we have actually in the request, which is okay. And yeah, if let's say here author not equals null, in this case what we want to do is context dot authors dot remove, and we want to remove the author, of course, if it is not null, because that's the delete one. Why are we heading background music, or is it just me? No, I have some background music. It's yeah, I just like to have background music, and most streamers or well for live coding sessions they also have some background music. So yeah, it's something that that I have added. Is the background music too loud? Is it disturbing, or I don't know? Just let me know, Roy, if something's wrong with the background music. Okay, and yeah, so if the author is not null, then we want to remove it, and in the end we can just say here await a context.save changes async. So if we don't add the author to the remove, well, then save changes would probably do nothing, or for sure it will not do anything. So return new unit. Let's return that. Sorry, Roy, I don't really get. You say that you are hearing even. I'm not sure I get what you mean by that. Sorry for that. Okay, so we have this handle. We have this handle for delete. Now the problem is that we probably have blogs with some authors as owner, and I'm not sure that we might. I'm not sure that we might be able to really delete an author. A little bit too loud. Okay, I will just tune it down a little bit. So right now, I guess the music should. So, or the volume for the music should be tuned down right now, I guess. Okay, I see here a question. If you don't have repository pattern in this architecture, how can I implement unit of work pattern? You actually don't have to implement unit of work pattern. And that's actually something that, well, this is a very, very, very big discussions at the highest level, I would say. But the main idea is that the DB context in Entity Framework Core or in Entity Framework in generally implements already two patterns. It implements the unit of work pattern and it implements the repository pattern. Because the DB context already implements the unit of work pattern is that you can actually have this method save changes async. That's a sign that actually this is a unit of work, because you can perform here different type of work, and at the end you can just say, okay, save the changes. So basically, every time we do here a remove, right now, actually nothing happens to the database. Entity Framework just tracks that this author should be removed. But here we could do or take any other actions or any other on any other domain objects, and then at the end we can just click here save changes, and then, well, everything would be saved. So this is the unit of work. The fact that we have authors here and blogs on the DB context as DBset, those DB sets, if you look into the DBset class in Entity Framework, it implements the repository pattern. So actually, the DB context is already using unit of work and repository pattern. So if you use unit of work and repository pattern, the problem is that you're actually using those pattern or on something that already uses that pattern. Now, I just want to also go to the other side a little bit, because this was, I would say, the main, the main pep talk of those who actually say that you never should use repositories when you are using the Entity Framework. Now, I am a little bit more balanced, because in my opinion, it might actually make sense to use repositories. For instance, if you have a very standard layered architecture application, where you have the domain, you have then your services, and then you have your data access layer, and then you have whatever type of application you have. So in that case, actually, it makes sense, because you have a service, or you have service classes that do actually a lot of logic, and that actually also work a lot with the database itself. So in that case, it might be useful to have repositories, so that especially that you would have to inject them probably and rely on dependency inversion, so that you that you are able to actually switch implementations. But actually, what we have in this type of architecture that we have right now with the CQRS, actually you can unit test your domain model, or domain logic should be in there, and you can integration test your handlers, and that's it. So yeah, in my opinion, here, as said, we should be a little bit more balanced. In a regular layered application, I would probably use repositories, although not always. But in this type of CQRS way of doing stuff, I wouldn't really want to do that. Also, because here, for instance, you could simply decide that in the next handler that we want to implement, we might want to use Dapper, or we might even want to use I don't know, Azure Cosmos DB or Mongo, or whatever other data store. So the power of this type of architecture with handlers resides in the fact that for each handler you can actually use whatever technology you want in order to do your job. I don't know. I hope this kind of like a little bit answered your question. So commonly, Entity Framework DB Context already implements unit of work and repository patterns. So this is why in some instances, a lot of people say that it is actually an overhead to implement your own unit of work and repositories. But on the other hand, when we have such a decoupled architecture, and as you see here, we actually don't rely a lot of on dependency injection, then you just might simply skip that overhead. In fact, in this application or in this type of architecture, we don't even have what we usually have in the services layer. Everything is here. If we need domain logic, we will push it to the domain itself, like we did with the update previously. If we have, let's say, infrastructure logic, like in interacting with the database and things like that, we would put that here directly in the handler, but we wouldn't have a service for that. So in this case, what we actually do or what we achieve with these handlers is that instead of having service classes that tend to become really very, very big, we have isolated small classes that execute only one certain task. Good. Let's go then one step further and go back to our module, because I guess we have to finalize things here. So we will have here, for instance, I guess we can just here await mediator.send, and we create the command new update. Sorry, this was a delete author. And yeah, we could then use object initializer to assign the ID to the author ID. And yeah, that's actually cool. So we can then just turn results, and here no content. We say that we return no content. So yeah, that would be it. Once again, let's run it, but I'm fairly sure that probably this one will fail, because as said, when we started everything, we really didn't pay any attention at all at how relationships were modeled in the database. And since we have a blog, or on a blog we have an owner ID, probably if a user is assigned to a certain blog, you won't be able to delete that at all. Let's see, but I get API blogs. We just have one blog, or no, execute. We didn't execute it. I will try to see if we have an author that actually doesn't belong to a blog. So we have this author with ID 1, and we have this author, which I guess is the ID 2, but we don't have any other blogs. So if we go to the authors, let's see exactly what authors do we have. And we have this author with ID, this one. So let's just copy that. And let's try to run the delete right now. Okay. Okay, something happened here. Guess we even have some error. No, it's just Swagger that that had some problem. Okay, it seems like that. Let me just check, because one thing that I guess we might do wrong, and if we are not careful, this is exactly what happens, is that yes, of course we need to await this. We need to await that. Okay, so that was the problem. You're welcome. Thank you very much for your question regarding the unit of work pattern. I mean, the whole thing about patterns is, and this probably comes with experience while you are working on several different production applications. Patterns are there to help you, but if you blindly try to implement patterns only because, well, there are people that say that it's good to use that pattern in that certain scenario, that might not always be the answer. So okay, I guess we just returned the tool for no content, and I guess that if we go to these authors once again, and if we execute, yeah, that author is gone. So we just have 3 right now. We had 4 authors previously. And this means that if we look right now at the author endpoint, we have a fully CRUD authors endpoint with get list, get one single author, create an author, update an author, and delete. So we have a full CRUD here, which is cool. But then we'll go over to blogs, and with blogs, it is a little bit more complicated. And why do I say that? Is because if we take just a small look here at the domain model, we have this idea of contributors. And we might actually want to add contributors to a certain blog or remove contributors from a certain blog. And of course, we want to also be able to get the information about who are the contributors for a certain blog. So this is why we will need to use the concept of nested resources when we implement the blog part. But I would like to have a small break right now. So please stay tuned, because in 10 minutes we'll go back to work and we'll try to implement all the other actions or endpoints that we actually need for our blogs feature, which will include also work with nested feature, and we'll try to do it really sticking to all the REST principles. Once again, stay tuned. I will be back here in 10 minutes, I promise. And there's plenty of other things to come while finishing up this .NET 6 minimal API. So let's keep in touch, and we'll hear each other in 10 minutes. Okay, I'm back. I think we're good now. So let's get right into it. So once again, whenever you have questions or you want to say something, don't be shy and use the chat. As I guess you already seen, I'm more than glad to stop and have a chat with you and discuss different things. So that's I guess one of the most important things when doing this type of sessions, of live coding sessions. So yeah, just don't be shy. That's my main challenge for you, I would say. Let's see, the stream seems to be okay. Yeah, I guess everything should be okay. If you can't hear me or can't see the screen or things like that, then also please just let me know. But it seems that everything should be okay. Good. Let's then go over to the blogs. And let's start with the interesting part here. And as said, we want to implement this type of nested resources for blog collaborators or contributors. And what we have done for the blogs, as we knew that it would get slightly bigger than the authors, we have designed this a little bit differently, meaning that we have two type of different endpoints here. So we have an endpoint for all the reads, where we would implement all the reads that we need, and we would have here this endpoint for the write that we actually want to do. And all the gets will be in the reads endpoint, and all the writes will of course be in the write endpoint. Now, when we want to add a contributor, we actually need to write it. So let's get here and yeah, let's add a new endpoint. So this endpoint should be endpoints.map post, because we want to add a contributor. And here, what we want to do here is we have here an API / blogs, but then we want the blog ID as a routing param, and then we will have contributors. And that's how we handle this type of nested resources in a fully REST way. And in this case, we would also need here a contributor. And here we have put all our DTOs as nested classes for those endpoints. And for if we want to add a contributor actually to a blog, the only thing that we need to do is actually provide a contributor ID. Okay, so let's then here, for instance, then create a new public. We can even make it a record. And here, contributor add. Sorry. That's how we define a record, and the only thing that we need here is the contributor ID. So that's the only thing that we will have in the body. Okay, so we have created this this record here. Now then we can say, for instance, that what we would need here is, and let's have it async, and I guess we'll go on a different line with that. And here it would be add blog contributor, and here we have the, we can of course bind to the routing param, which will be int blog ID. And here we could say that we provide a blog ID to this method. Of course, we'll have to implement this method. So right now it's not implemented, but we'll come to this soon enough. Good. And now we have also to describe our endpoint. And here it would be with name, and that would be add contributor. And then with display name, and here we'll use blogs because we want this to be under the blog section on the Swagger documentation. And then what will we produce here? I guess we'll produce a no content once again. Because if they want to get the contributor for a certain blog, then, well, then they have an endpoint for that. We'll still have to implement that. But for now, that's the whole point. And if we might get here an error, we might produce a 500. But we already had a semicolon, so that's not needed anymore. So that's cool. Now we are good. So now the only thing is we have to implement this method. Private async task source of iResult. As said, in the minimal API, we don't return action results, we return iResult. That's how this minimal API is designed right now. And here we will need the int blog ID. But here we actually, sorry, here in the post, we'll need the blog ID, but we'll also need a contributor add, which is coming in the body. Of course, in our case, it will only consist of an ID, but that's what we should have in the body. Now, of course, we need to pass this also to the method. So we need to pass in the contributor, and of course, we need it here. Contributor add. Cool. Good. Now, we have to go over to the whole command and command handler things. So let's go here to the commands and let's add a new class. And it would be, in this case, add contributor. But let's also type it correctly. Add contributor. I guess that should work right now. Once again, we are using mediator, so we have all queries or commands should be marked with this iRequest, and we need to specify here in this iRequest what we'll return. But in this case, we won't return anything. We just add a contributor and that's it. So we just don't need to provide anything here. And for properties for this command, as I say, in the commands, we have to encapsulate all the information that actually the handler will need in order to process process that specific command. So in this case, what we would need is an integer for, sorry, it should of course be public int ID, sorry, not ID. We would need a blog ID. Let's also use init only properties here because we don't want to change this data, and public int, and we'll also need the contributor ID get it. And by the way, a contributor is actually an author, so it's actually an ID from the authors list. Okay, so this is actually everything that we need for the command, I guess. So let's go to the handler and new class, add contributor handler. Cool. We have this, of course. We follow mediator and we have to implement iRequest handler. And since we have to specify only the command, add contributor. So we don't specify also return type because we actually don't care about returning something here. We just want to execute a certain action. So let's implement the interface. Async task. Cool. So that should be okay. Now let's have a constructor here. And one thing that we'll need here for sure is the DB context. So private read only. Thoughtful DB context. Thoughtful is the name of the application itself. And we'll name this context. Of course, we'll need to add the usings for that. That should be just fine. And here we just need to also inject this and assign to the field. And voila, that's it. So we have set up right now the constructor and dependency injection for our handler. Now, how do we actually want to add a contributor? So we would have to perform here 2 steps, I guess. First of all, we would need a var. We would need to get a blog. Var blog equals await, and here it would be context dot blogs. And here, what we would have to do is also not add, but what we want here is we want an include here, because we want to include for each blog, or for the specific blog, we want to include the contributors, of course. And that will actually generate the list. Good. Let's then maybe go one line here, and after we include, we want to get a certain blog, so first or default async, and we care about a blog for which the ID equals the request.blog ID. Cool. So right now we have the blog. Then we also need the author that we want to add as a contributor. So var contributors equals, and here await. What we could do here is simply say context dot blogs sorry, in this case we look for an author with authors dot first or default async, and here we look for an author for which the ID equals to the ID specified in our command. Cool. So right now we have this right now we have these 2 entities. Now here, if blog not equals null and contributor not equals null, because we want to make sure that none of them is actually null. So in this case, what we would like to do is on the blog, we have the method of add contributor, and we have to specify then the contributor. Cool. So actually that would be it, I guess. We could eventually maybe even create a possibility to add more contributors in a single go, providing an array of contributors in our post request. But for now, I guess we'll stick with this one. We add contributors one at a time. So right now, and if you ask yourself, this is the whole idea of rich domain model. Of course, we didn't care a lot of our domain model to really make everything as we would do for a normal application, because we wanted to concentrate on the minimal API itself. But the idea is that this is not an anemic domain model, but it tends to be a rich one, because you see that we have all these methods that are actually responsible to change the state, for instance. And see, we have here also a method for set owner. So we will also be able to change the owner of the blog. So for that, we probably need also an endpoint. But in this case, we have this contributor, and we get an author, and the whole logic about adding a contributor to the list, well, that's actually should be handled here. Now, here, of course, we don't do a lot of things, like, for instance, we check that if the author ID equals the author ID, but I'm not sure exactly why we did this check, because this actually checks the owner, because we have this author ID. Okay, it's the ID of the owner. So yeah, good that we looked at that, because actually this check here is not needed at all. That's not needed, because I don't care about the owner right now. I just want to add a contributor. So let's, of course, I could do, for instance, if I already have that contributor, I could maybe do something like, for instance, if contributors, let's say here any contributor for which the ID equals author.id. So this would actually mean that we already have a contributor with that ID. So in that case, we don't want to add it. So if we are in this scenario, so we actually have to negate this, which means that if we don't have such a contributor, then we add it. Otherwise, we actually don't do anything. Actually, that's the only check that we would need here for now. Of course, here's where you would place a lot more validation and all the rules for your domain logic and requirements for your business and everything. But as said, we just wanted to keep it very, very, very simple. So we just add a contributor if the contributor doesn't already exist. So that's actually what we try to do here. Good. So we have this domain method. And if we go here on these handlers with, where is it, add contributor, that's exactly the method that we actually use here. So on the blog, we use the add contributor. Now we know that the domain model does some changes. We don't know exactly why or what changes. We don't even care. But what we know is that it's our responsibility as the handler to simply say here context.save changes async. And that's here the cool part of entity tracking in EF and EF Core, because we don't actually have to check anything. These entities, the blog and the contributors, are already tracked by Entity Framework. So if there are some changes, when we call save changes async, those changes will be persisted. So we don't have to care about what has changed. We just do a save changes. If nothing has changed, then well, we do a save changes and nothing will happen or nothing will be updated. But that is really not a big problem. And that's actually it from our handler. What we need to do is here return unit, I guess. But we'll have to return a new unit, of course. But once again, that's actually a mediator thing, because when it doesn't actually return void, it always returns a unit. Well, that's this part of the interface, this iRequest handler, but we really don't care about what actually that unit is. Good. So let's go right now back to our endpoint, which is in the right. And I guess we have right now everything that we need to do. So we need to create a new instance of the command. So add the contributor, which is the name of the command. Or sorry, let's call it command equals new add contributor. Guess is it the correct one? Yeah, let's see. So we can we can use an object initializer, of course, here, and we can specify that the blog ID equals blog ID, of course. And then we have the contributor ID, which would be the contributor, so our body that we get from the request, and the ID, contributor ID. That's actually what we need to do here. Good. Okay. So I guess we should be good with that right now. We have the command. Now the only thing that we need to do is simply await mediator.send, and we send this command. And when everything is ready, we just here return result, and we say that we return no content here. So that's cool. We're done here. Okay, let's look a little bit what we have here, if everything is okay. So we have the await here, we get the blog ID, we get the contributor from the body. So everything should be fine right now and in place. Cool, let's run the application then. And let's of course start and try to add a contributor. Of course, as usual, it opens on the other screen. Cool. Okay, so first thing is, okay, we used we should have used blogs here, not blog, because I want everything to be under the same section. So let's run it again. And now it should be better. Okay, let's see. Yeah, correct, right now we have the same section. Good, let's first get a list of the blogs to actually check out what blogs do we have. I guess we don't have any contributors. We have owner, but yeah, here we actually don't show the contributors at all, because we actually don't have any contributor. And if we want to check the contributors for a blog, then we'll have as a get on this nested endpoint or on this nested resource. So we will have to implement it as a get. Good. Then in order to be able to test this out, let's also implement the get for that. But in this case, we would need to go here on the reads. And here on the reads, the first thing that we will need is a new DTO public. Let's make it record, and that should be let me, I guess I have used here the regular class type way to actually create this record, because there are some problems with the auto mapper when you map to a record as a destination. So in this case, we would have here a contributor list, I would say, or no, contributor. Okay, and cool. So a contributor is actually an author. So what do we actually get from the author? We get the name and the bio, and the map. Actually, we do a custom mapping for that. So yeah, in this case, for a contributor, yeah, I guess that's the only thing that actually is important from a blog contributor perspective: the name and the bio, probably, which is the description of the contributor. So let's have here a public string name, but we could even use init only properties, and we will have a public string bio get init. Now, the only thing that we would need to do here is we will also need to go to the automapper profiles, because we would need a profile for that. So where do we have our profiles? Automapper profiles, blog rights profile. Okay, so here we don't have any profile for now, but this actually the first that we add. So create map, and we actually want to map here from an author, which is part of the domain. But I'm not sure why that create map. I'm not sure what the problem with the author is here, or why it doesn't recognize this create map method. That's strange. Did I mistype something? Probably let's take this entire thing, because we'll also need a fully qualified domain name for that. So we want to create a map. Okay, things didn't. Okay, so right now that should be cool. Now, so we want here from an author in our domain, but here we want from the blog. How is it called? Blog's right endpoint. Blog's right endpoint. But it's then a contributor. Contributor add should be. Okay, why doesn't, I don't want to have a new. let me go once again there. So we are here in this endpoint for the read, and we have here, it's called only contributor. Sorry for that. Yeah, because it's we don't add it, we just want to get it. Good. So but you know what? That's actually, we are here in the wrong profile because this is for blog rights. And we just now want to get the contributors right now. So we just want to get them. So this means that we will have to do everything here. So in this case, would have something very similar to that, only that the map, this case would be from blog rights endpoint and then contributor. Good. And then so for the destination name, we will map from the full name of the author, and for destination bio, we'll map from the bio of the author. So that's cool. We have a map right now. So I guess AutoMapper should work. Now let's go back here to the blog's read endpoint, because if we have this DTO that we want to return, we have the AutoMapper profile. So let's go actually here and add the endpoint that we need. So endpoints, map get, because here in this we just mapped the get, so it would be for API -blogs -id -contributors. Let's call this blog ID to be more explicit. Cool. So we have that. Now async, and here we actually just need the blog ID. And for this one, we'll create a method that will be called get blog contributors, and we pass in the blog ID. Of course, we just yeah, let's move that on a separate line because we also need to await this. And let's just also add the metadata to the endpoint that we will need. So with name, specify a name. This case would be get blog contributors, and with display name. And the display name we use for the section in Swagger, so it should be like the others, blogs. Cool. And then produces. What do we produce here? Well, we produce we produce here a list of contributor. Cool. And we'll eventually produce 500 probably if something goes wrong. And I guess that's all what we need for now. Let's start to implement this method. Private task of iResult, and we have copied over the name. So for this one, we just need an int representing the blog ID, but we need also here from the body the contributor. So which is okay, and of course we have also to pass it. Cool. So we just need to also specify it as a param. Contributor. Okay. So we have the method. Now, in order to implement this method, what do we need? Well, I guess we already know by now. We need a comment, we need a handler, and then we can wire everything up together. So let's create here a new comment. Or did we already? Oh, we did already create it. So we have this add contributor. And yeah, oh, sorry. I guess I'm too tired. So we already have created this add contributor command and command handler, which is actually cool because this means that we can here right now create var command equals new get, or how did we call it? It's actually a query. Oh my god, that's so not okay. So I guess I'm too tired for that because this is a query. Get blogs by ID, get all blogs, create blog, add contributor. Okay, that's the handler. So where are the add contributor? That's actually oh, actually we have implemented this add contributor, which is okay. But yeah, we need to implement the get one. Sorry, I guess I guess I'm really too tired right now. So yeah, we need to implement a query, and that one is what we don't have. Okay, let's create here a new class. Get blog contributors, which would be the query, and this would be an I request, and it will return a list of be blog reads endpoint.contributor. We will probably need to add some usings here, which is okay. And for this one, we just need the blog ID, public int blog ID. Let's also use here init only property because we don't want to change it afterwards. And then we need the handler for that. So it would be get blog contributors handler. So this would implement the I request handler interface of, and here we'll have get blog contributors, which is the query that we want to get. And we want to also here return, let's just copy that from our query, because this is what we want to return, list of. So that's what we want to return. Let's go not here but here. So let's just add a comma, and yeah, sorry, we just need 2 angle brackets. That's correct, I guess. So we just need some usings. So that should be okay right now. Let's maybe try to move this like that. But yeah, maybe we'll just keep it here on this line. And implement interface. So public async will be this. So we'll have here a constructor, and we'll need here the DB context, and here we'll also need a mapper. So private read only thoughtful okay DB context. So we'll need the using for that, of course. That should be it. Thoughtful DB context. And I said we need an IMapper. Mapper. So let's also add the field for the mapper, private read only IMapper. Cool, we have that. We can just start to assign those. This is the one, and this is the second. Right now we have everything we need in this command handler. Cool. So let's we need here to get here a var a blog equals await context.blogs, because we first need to get the blog, but we also need to include for this blog we need to include the contributors, of course, because we want to be able to do that. Cool. So right now that we have the contributors, Of course, we can just say that we want first for default async, and we are looking for a blog for which the ID equals request.blog ID. Cool. So here, now the list will not be null because in the constructor we create an empty list if there is no list. But maybe the blog can be null because maybe we provide a wrong blog ID. So in this case, if blog not equals null, if the blog is not null, then what we want to actually do here is return mapper.map, and we want to map to a list of blog reads endpoint.contributors, and we want to do this from the blog.contributors property. So this is where the mapping should work, and if blog is null, then we can just simply return a new list of would be a new list of blog reads endpoint.contributors, which would be actually an empty one. If we don't find a blog, we just retrieve an empty array. Cool. Although I guess here we would, if we don't find a blog, we would maybe better display a not found message or response, but that would actually mean that we would have to add the concept of more complex responses that we return from the handlers. I guess for now, for the purpose of this one, I guess we'll leave it like that. So we have this one right now. So let's go here back to the blog reads. So in this case, we have here a query. And once again, here we don't need a contributor because this is a query. And of course, then we have to remove it also from here. We don't really need that. Okay. And then we have to also remove it from here because we don't need that. Okay. So here, this is a new get blog contributors and I guess that's we have actually named our command exactly the same way. Get query here, get blog contributors. It's exactly like the same. Cool. So in this case, we would have to fully qualify that. So once again, thoughtful dot API dot features dot blogs dot queries, because this is where our query is, and this is actually what we want to create. Of course, with an S. So this would be okay. You could even use this property initializer, and here, of course, the blog ID equals blog ID. Cool, we have that. So now we can just go over and simply send this var result equals mediator.send, and we just send this query, and it will actually return us the result, which will contain a list. So we can just here say return results.ok, and in this case we just return the result. But of course we need to await this. This is async, and of course we need to mark this as an async method. And now everything should be fine, I guess. Okay, so right now we should be able to get a list of contributors. Let's run the application. So it started on the other screen, but I'll bring it over just in a second. Good. So let's see. We have this get API blogs ID contributor, and I know that we have a blog with the ID 1. So let's specify the ID 1 for the blog and execute. I would expect right now to have an empty array. And in fact, yes, I have a 200, means it's okay, but I have an empty array. Cool, so this endpoint seems to work right now. Now let's add the contributor in this API blogs blog ID contributors. Here we can just add, so I say here that 4. Let's try this out. So for the blog ID 1, I would like to add the contributor with the ID 1. I guess that that should work. So let's execute that. Okay, and we received the 204 no content, which is exactly what we have designed. So let's run this endpoint once again. So execute. And in this case, we can see that for the blog ID 1, right now we have a contributor. So these two methods seem to work right now. So that is really, really cool. Now, let's implement the idea of removing a contributor. And removing a contributor is actually, but you know what? Right now, I guess because we actually need in the contributor that we actually specify here. So in this one, we also need the ID, because when we want to remove a contributor, we have to specify the ID for the contributor that we want to remove. Int contributor ID get init. So that's cool. No problem with that one. Oh, there is a problem. Okay, but then we have to update also our automapper profile. So let's go here in the blog reads profile, and we have this one. So let's also add a new dot for member destination dot destination contributor ID options map from and source, and we map from the ID. So that should be it. So right now this is fixed. So this means that we can actually implement the endpoint right now to remove a contributor. So let's head over back to our right endpoint, and let's try to edit. So endpoints dot map delete in this case. Now, as this is a nested resource, we have to specify the exact URI until the resource that in our case we want to remove. So it would be API slash blogs slash blog ID, of course. Then we need here contributors and slash, and then contributor ID. That's actually what we need for this one. Now for what we need here, now the async is of course outside the parentheses. Async, so we need here to pass in, let's just move here on another line. So we need to pass in here an int for the blog ID and an int for the contributor ID. Okay, and then we'll await and call a method which will be called remove contributor, and this one will take in the blog ID and the contributor ID. Okay, let's just copy the name to reuse it afterwards. If we are here, let's also describe our endpoint, because here what we want to do is with name. And what will be the name here? It will be remove contributor, and display name, because we still want to have this under the blogs section. So in this case, the display name will be blogs. once again. And then what do we produce? We produce a 204, and we produce, hopefully not, but in case it happens, let's just document that we might also produce this one. Good, so then let's implement this method. Private async task of iResult. Then the name, and this takes an int log ID and int contributor ID. Cool. Okay, now of course we would need a command, because this is an action that we want to actually perform. So we need a command here, and then of course a command handler. So let's go here and let's add a new one, new class. So it would be remove log contributor. And this would be a simple I request, because we don't want to return anything else. But here we need the properties that we actually get from the routing. So it would be an int log ID. Or we can even use init. And we would also need an int for the contributor ID. Public int contributor ID. Also, let's use init. Okay, so yeah, that's the command itself, and then we need a command handler. So let's go over to the handlers folder and add new class. Here remove log contributor handler, and as far as we use mediator, we have to implement I request handler. In this case, we just have to specify the command because we don't return anything. So here we will have then remove log contributor. Okay. Good. Let's implement the interface. Public we'll make this async because we want to wait. Let's add the constructor. Here we won't need an IMapper because we don't return anything. So the only thing that we will need here is the DB context. So let's add that. Also, let's inject this in our constructor. Also DB context context, and assign it to the field. Okay, and we have it. Now, what we actually need to do here is, because on the blog, we also have here this remove contributor, and we just have to specify the author that we want actually to remove. And let's go here. Let's go then back here in our handler. Where is it? Remove blog contributor. So there are actually two things that we actually need here. First of all, we need a blog. Var blog equals wait context dot blogs, and once again we need to include our contributors. Okay, so the contributors, and then first or default async. Okay, and then we need the author. Var author equals wait context dot authors, and here we just need the first or default async. And then of course we have to specify the condition here. So we look of course for a blog for which the ID equals request dot blog ID, and here instead we look for an author for which the ID equals to the request dot contributor ID. We call this. Cool. So now that we have that, we can just maybe once again run this simple if. So if blog, want to make sure that it's actually not null, and also the author is not null, because we don't want to remove a null from a list that could cause some problems, and the author not equals null. In that case, what we would like to do is blog dot remove contributor, and we just have to specify the author that we have from the database, and that should actually do the thing. Of course, we need to save these changes then so await and context.save changes async, and then we can just return the unit because we are done here. Missing commas in the DB context object. Okay. Yeah, semicolon. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. It's nice to have somebody that is so attentive. Good. Good catch. Thank you. Good. So right now we have the comment for the remove. We have the handler for the remove contributor. So we can wire everything up together if we go back to our blog write. So here we just need a new command. It's new remove blog contributor. And here we have the blog ID. And then we have here the contributor ID equals contributor ID. So that would be the object. And then we can just simply say await mediator.send, and we send the comment. And after we receive it, return results dot no content. Cool. So now we should be able to actually remove a contributor from our blog. So we added to the blog with ID 1, we added the contributor with the ID 1. So let's run our API again, and let's try to actually, okay, we have an error here. So somewhere probably we still missed something, a semicolon. Of course, yes, after the object initializer. Good. Let's run it again. It's on the other screen, but let's bring it over. So let's jump directly here to the removing a contributor. So let's try it out. So we want to remove from the blog ID 1 a contributor which has the author ID 1. So let's execute. Okay, we have a 204, which is okay. So we didn't have an error, which is kind of cool. Right now, let's get the contributors for a certain blog to see that this is actually that the contributor was removed. So we want the contributors for the blog ID 1, and we execute, and we have right now an empty list. So previously we had here a contributor, and right now we don't have any contributor at all. So this means that, well, we have seen right now how we actually work with nested resources. Because here we consider the contributors to be a nested resource to the blog. So that's why we have this kind of like longer URLs with API blogs / blog ID and then contributor. This is for the post. But although also the name here should be with S, should be pluralized, so we will do that. That's actually the get, sorry. Then we have the post, which we use actually to add a contributor to this specified blog ID. And then we have this delete, which is actually used to remove a contributor with a certain contributor ID from a blog with this specific blog ID. Now, of course, we would have to implement also for the get the possibility to get all the contributors, like we have it here. But maybe also the option to get only one contributor, although that wouldn't make sense for this type of APIs. Only get one of them. Because if we want to get all the information about a contributor as an author, then we would actually use the author's endpoint for that. We get here the contributors, like the only information that we care about in a blog regarding a contributor. So if you want to get full information about a certain author, you should use that specific endpoint. That's how we actually follow the REST principles. Now, the only thing that I saw here is in the blog reads, there is something that needs to be pluralized, and it was not. But why? This is blogs, okay? API blogs, it are contributors, because this is a get, and this gets a list of contributors. So this is definitely with an S at the end. So that would be it. Now, the only thing that we still would need to add here is actually the option. Actually, no, I guess we are pretty much done right now, because we are able to add a contributor, we are able to remove a contributor, and we are able to get information about the entire blog, which is something okay. And we'll also have the option to create the blog. So yeah, I guess that's mostly the API in the form that that I would like to have at the end. So for those of you who are still here, this was a longer series, and if you're on my YouTube channel, then there is a playlist containing the recent live streams, and there is creating this .NET 6 minimal API from scratch, which has 4 episodes, this being the 4th one. So if you want to follow the entire progress, you might go through all the episodes. But the main idea is that .NET 6 is coming out in a very few weeks, and one of the most hyped features of .NET 6 is this minimal API, which is kind of like something very interesting because it just allows you to have a program.cs file, which is, by the way, in .NET 6 for all project types, the standard startup model. So we don't have that startup class anymore. Everything happens here in the program.cs. But the main idea is that we have this map endpoints method on the application, and we have moved this then in different files, and we have tried to organize this in modules. The idea is that instead of having controllers, then you just, for instance, like we have here, you define your endpoints with map get. And this is, well, the trademark, I would say, of the minimal API. In this case, here you then have to define some metadata about your endpoints that theoretically Swagger uses in order to generate the documentation. However, we have seen that this is not always working as we would like. So there's probably a lot of things that still needs to be done here. But there are also other, well, shortcomings with the .NET 6 minimal API. And one of the shortcomings is that you cannot actually use filters. So if you were a regular ASP.NET Core developer, then you most probably have used action filters a lot. Now, this is not possible with the .NET minimal API. And unfortunately, there is one other important thing that is not possible, and this being, for instance, API versioning. So unfortunately, this is not possible here out of the box in the .NET 6 minimal API. Of course, there might be workarounds to achieve that, but of course, I would not probably recommend to go that route. And then, last but not least, another very important thing is that you cannot run, for instance, a minimal API, but also controllers side by side. And that's actually something that's very annoying, because in virtually all ASP.NET Core projects, what you could have is actually, you could, for instance, have Razor pages, but you could also have controllers in the same project. So no problem with that. Even if you had a Blazor server project, you could have the Blazor server things, but you could still have Razor pages, and you could still you could still have controllers if you wanted for certain actions. Now with the minimal API, you can't do that. So you either use only the minimal API or you don't use it a lot. And these shortcomings, unfortunately, I think that, okay, the minimal API as I would say, step forward is, well, a very good thing. That's really nice, but I don't see it as being a production ready product right now in .NET 6. So most probably Microsoft will build upon the minimal API in .NET 6, and I guess that maybe in .NET 7 we will have a minimal API version that would be better suitable, I guess, for real production applications. But for now, it's actually very nice to play with it to really get a grasp on how things are working or how things work with a minimal API, because this is certainly something that will be a part of the future for ASP.NET Core developers. So yeah, it's definitely worth to take a look at it at least. Okay, so this being said, thank you very, very much for watching along. Now, if you're interested, okay, there's a question here. How is the load to convert an application from .NET 3.1 to .NET 6? Actually, I haven't tried it out, but I guess it is pretty. I guess it is pretty well. It could be tricky, and in fact, I will investigate this a little bit deeper. But why it would be tricky? Because the problem is that you don't have the startup class here. So you would have to migrate everything here in this program.cs class. And here the model is a little bit different. Do you recommend to migrate? So if you have the 3.1, theoretically that will go out of support, I guess, somewhere May next year. So you might need to think about upgrading at least to .NET 5. But then again, it really depends also on the application itself. For example, at some customers where I have worked on, and that was more a customer decision, is we even have an API built in ASP.NET Core 2.1, and nobody will ever want to really upgrade that. Because if you're not doing very, very, I don't know, very deep stuff with ASP.NET Core, and you might run into bugs that might actually break your applications or stop you from enhancing your applications. If you're using a .NET version that is out of support, actually nobody at Microsoft will look into fixing that bug. But I would say that for the most applications, even if you don't upgrade, well, that's not really a very, very, very big problem. Even or more because, for instance, 3.1 is a long-term servicing brand a version of .NET. So yeah, it means that it's a very stable one. So once again, my suggestion or recommendation is it depends on what exact scenario do you have. The migration itself could be a little bit more tricky because, as I said, you would have to migrate everything from the startup class here actually in this program class. And there are some other very, very few or minor things that are a little bit different here, like how the host gets configured. But usually, once again, in most of the applications or regular applications that I've seen at customers, you really don't do host configurations for yourself. Only if you have very specific requirements. But if you have host configurations in your .NET Core 3.1 projects, then you would also have to rewrite those configurations here in the program class. So yeah, it's definitely something that you would have to investigate, but investigate especially targeted to the exact app that you actually have in mind. I hope the answer was okay. Now, in programming, most of the answers are always it depends. So it's also in this case exactly the same thing. Good. Yeah. Then once again, thank you very, very much for being here. If you keep in touch with this channel, then maybe you just subscribe to it, because we'll have other live coding sessions coming next week. One will be for beginners. It will be called ASP.NET Core for Total Noobs, and yeah, there we'll actually start to learn ASP.NET Core and hope that that people that are at the beginning stages of their career might be able to join. So if you know somebody that might be interested, just feel free to forward the link to this channel, and they might subscribe to it, so that they would stay up to date. But we'll also have at least one other live coding session. I'm not sure exactly what project will I want to start next, but we'll definitely start a new project that we will work on. Thank you once again very much, and really I wish you a very good day or good evening. So bye.